That night, she struck my face so hard, her diamond ring sliced my cheek. A stone popped out. Rolling across the floor of the penthouse I bought myself while my relatives laughed. I bent down, pretending to retrieve it for my mother, but instead slid the gem into my pocket. I did not know then that this tiny stone was the evidence that would destroy their plan to steal my company worth millions. My name is Sage Riley. I am 32 years old, and I have spent the last decade of my life building walls, pouring foundations, and negotiating air rights until my hands were stained with ink and dust. I am the sole owner of Skyline Crest Properties. I am the woman who rehabilitated the riverside lofts when the city had marked them for demolition. I am the person whose name is on the deed, the mortgage, and the insurance policy of this penthouse. But standing here tonight, amidst the clinking of crystal flutes and the heavy scent of expensive perfume that did not belong to me, you would think I was merely the hired help. The living room of my penthouse was expansive, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a view I had paid for with sleepless nights and ulcers. Tonight, however, that view was blocked by the silhouette of my mother, Marianne Riley. She was holding court in the center of the room, a glass of vintage champagne in one hand, her other hand gesturing wildly as if she were conducting an orchestra. On that gesturing hand sat the ring. It was a gaudy thing, a platinum band supporting a cluster of diamonds that looked less like jewelry and more like a weapon. The center stone was massive, a rock that caught the light of the chandelier and fractured it into 1,000 arrogant rainbows. She had bought it 3 years ago, claiming it was an investment, an heirloom for the family vault. Tonight, it flashed aggressively every time she pointed at a corner of my home. "And over here," Marianne announced, her voice projecting with the theatrical vibrato of a woman who believes she is the protagonist of every room she enters. "We will knock down this partition. It creates such a barrier to the flow of energy. Dad needs an open space for his reading chair, don't you think?" My father, Greg, sat on my Italian leather sofa, looking vaguely uncomfortable but nodding obediently. He was a man who had long ago learned that the path of least resistance was simply to agree with his wife. I stood by the kitchen island, gripping the cold marble edge until my knuckles turned white. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice low, trying to maintain the veneer of civility I had practiced for years. "We are not knocking down any walls. This is structural." She waved her hand dismissively, the diamonds flashing a warning. "Oh, Harper, don't be so rigid. We are talking about the family legacy here. This penthouse is going to be the headquarters, the gathering place." "It is my home," I corrected her. "And my office?" From the hallway leading to the bedrooms, my brother Blake emerged. He was holding a laser tape measure. Where had he even found that? And grinning like a man who had just struck oil. "Hey, Harp," Blake said, bypassing me completely to address Marianne. "The third floor is perfect. The lighting in the north corner is exactly what I need for the studio. I'm thinking we rip out the carpet in the guest suite, put in some hardwood, make it more industrial." "The third floor is currently leased to a tech startup," I said, my voice rising a fraction of an octave. "They have a 3-year contract. Blake—" "We can buy them out," my sister Tessa chimed in from the balcony. Sliding the glass door open, she walked in, looking around with a critical eye. "Or just evict them. Family comes first, right? Besides, I need the second floor for the kids. The layout is safer for toddlers than the townhouse. I was telling Mom, if we move the nursery to the east wing, the morning light will be better for their circadian rhythms." I looked at them. I looked at this assembly of people who shared my DNA. People who had spent the last 5 years mocking my little real estate hobby until it started making 7 figures. Now, suddenly, it was our building, our legacy, our headquarters. "Stop," I said. It was not a scream, but it cut through the chatter. "Everyone, stop." The room went quiet, but it was not the silence of respect. It was the silence of adults indulging a tantrum-throwing child. Marianne turned slowly, her face composing itself into a mask of patient disappointment. "Harper," she sighed, taking a sip of her champagne, "don't start this again. We are having a nice family dinner, a planning dinner." "This isn't planning," I said, stepping away from the island and walking into the center of the room. "This is a hostile takeover in my living room. I invited you for dinner because Dad said he wanted to see the place now that the renovations are done. I did not invite you to partition my property like a conquered country." "Your property?" Marianne let out a short, sharp laugh. She looked around at the aunts and cousins scattered on the sofas, inviting them to share the joke. "Did you hear that? She calls it her property." "It is my property," I stated. "The deed is in the name of Skyline Crest Properties. I own 100% of Skyline Crest." Marianne's expression hardened. The benevolent matriarch vanished, replaced by the woman who kept score of every favor she had ever done. She took a step toward me, entering my personal space. The smell of her perfume, heavy gardenia and musk, was suffocating. "And who paid for the incorporation fees? Harper?" she asked softly, dangerously. "Who signed the initial loan when the banks looked at your 24-year-old face and laughed? Who gave you the $20,000 that started this whole thing?" "I paid you back," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. "I paid you back within 18 months, with 10% interest. I have the receipts. Mom, I have the notarized release forms." "Money is just paper," she spat, her voice rising now, playing to the audience. "It is about support. It is about faith. I believed in you when no one else did. I put the family's security on the line for your little dream. And now that you have made it, you want to kick us out? You want to hoard it all for yourself like some greedy, selfish little girl?" "I am not kicking you out. I am asking you to respect my boundaries," I argued, but I knew it was a losing battle. With Marianne, you were either a servant or a traitor. There was no middle ground. "Selfish," Blake muttered from the hallway, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's always been like this. Keeps the good stuff. Throws scraps to the rest of us." "I have never taken a dime from you, Blake," I snapped, turning to him. "In fact, I seem to remember paying your rent 3 times last year." "Don't you dare talk to your brother like that," Marianne yelled. Stepping between us, her face was flushed now, her eyes wide with a manufactured rage. "He is an artist. He has a soul. You have a calculator where your heart should be. You are ungrateful, Harper, vile and ungrateful." "I am realistic," I shouted back, finally losing my composure. "And I am tired of you pretending you own my success. You do not own this company. Mom, you never did. That $20,000 was a loan, not a purchase of my soul." The air in the room seemed to vanish. The relatives froze, forks halfway to their mouths. I had said the forbidden thing. I had broken the cardinal rule of the Riley family: never contradict Marianne's version of history. She stared at me, her chest heaving. "I made you," she hissed. "I own you." "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You don't." The slap came out of nowhere. It was not a theatrical, movie-style slap. It was a vicious, uncontrolled strike. Her right hand, heavy with the weight of the platinum ring, whipped across my face with the force of pure malice. The impact was blinding. I felt a sharp, searing pain tear across my cheekbone, followed by the dull thud of bone against bone. My head snapped to the side. The sound was sickening, a wet, meaty crack that echoed off the high ceilings. I stumbled back, clutching the kitchen counter for support. The room spun for a second. My hand went to my face, and when I pulled it away, my fingers were wet with bright red blood. A jagged line of fire burned on my cheek. The ring, that massive, ridiculous diamond ring, had sliced me open. For 2 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, a ripple of nervous laughter broke out from the corner where my cousins were sitting. It was a cruel, relieved sound, the sound of the pack realizing the alpha had asserted dominance, and they were safe as long as they laughed along. "Well," Blake sneered, leaning against the doorframe, crossing his arms. I guess you finally pushed her too far. Harp, you kind of asked for that. Marianne stood there, breathing heavy, her hands still raised slightly. She didn't look horrified. She didn't look sorry. She looked vindicated. She lowered her hand and adjusted her silk blouse, smoothing the fabric as if she had just swatted a fly. "Look at what you made me do," she said, her voice trembling with fake victimhood. "You upset me so much I lost control. Look at this. Look at this mess." I was too dizzy to respond. I stared down at the floor, trying to blink away the black spots in my vision. That was when I saw it. Resting on the dark, polished oak floorboards, right near the toe of my boot, was a tiny, glittering object. It was a diamond. It must have happened upon impact. The force of the blow against my cheekbone had been violent enough to snap one of the prongs on her ring settings. A side stone, perhaps half a carat, had popped loose and fallen. The world seemed to slow down. The laughter of my relatives faded into a dull roar. The throbbing in my cheek became a distant drumbeat. All I could see was that stone. It lay there, innocent and cold, reflecting the overhead lights. Marianne was busy playing the martyr, turning to my father and sobbing dryly into his shoulder about how disrespectful I was. Blake was snickering with Tessa. No one was looking at the floor. No one was looking at me, really. To them, I was just the defeated object in the corner. A cold clarity washed over me. It was sharper than the cut on my face. I crouched down slowly. I think you dropped something," I mumbled, my voice thick. "What?" Marianne snapped, not bothering to turn around fully. I reached out. My fingers hovered over the diamond. In that second, 1,000 memories flashed through my mind. The loan shark rates she charged me disguised as motherly love. The way she took credit for my first building at the ribbon-cutting ceremony I hadn't invited her to. The way she had just sliced my face open in my own home and blamed me for it. I did not pick it up to give it back. I palmed the diamond. I used a sleight of hand I didn't know I possessed, sliding the stone seamlessly from my fingertips into the deep pocket of my blazer. In the same motion, I pretended to brush a piece of lint off the floor. "Nothing," I said, straightening up. Just a piece of glass." I pressed my hand against my bleeding cheek, feeling the hard, jagged edge of the diamond through the lining of my pocket. It dug into my hip, a secret weight. Marianne finally turned to look at me, her eyes scanning my face with disgust rather than concern. She glanced at her hand, flexing her fingers. She didn't notice the missing stone. The ring was so cluttered with gems, so ostentatious, that the absence of one stone wasn't immediately obvious in the dim mood lighting. "Go clean yourself up," she commanded, waving at the bathroom. "You are bleeding on the floor. It is unsanitary." "Yeah," Blake added. "Don't ruin the resale value. Harper?" I looked at them one last time. My family. The people who were currently mentally measuring my curtains and dividing my assets while I stood there bleeding. "I will go clean up," I said softly. I turned and walked toward the master bathroom. My hand stayed in my pocket, my fingers curling tight around the stolen diamond. They thought they had won. They thought the slap was the end of the argument, the physical punctuation mark that put me back in my place. They thought they could beat me, cut me, and take what was mine because they were family, and family always forgave. But as I closed the bathroom door and locked it, staring at the woman in the mirror with blood running down her face, I knew they were wrong. They had drawn first blood, yes, but I had taken something too. I pulled the diamond out of my pocket and held it up to the light. It was small, but it was flawless. And as I looked at it, a thought began to form in the back of my mind, a cold, calculated plan that had nothing to do with screaming matches or physical fights. If they wanted a war for assets, I would give them one, but I wouldn't use my fists. I would use the one thing Marianne loved more than her children. I would use her greed against her. The cold water from the bathroom tap stung as it hit the open wound on my cheek, but the pain was grounding. It forced me to focus. I grabbed a thick white towel and pressed it against my skin, watching the fabric turn crimson. In the mirror, My eyes looked different than they had 10 minutes ago. The fear was gone, replaced by the same cold, hard calculation that had gotten me out of a cubicle and into this penthouse in the first place. To understand why a mother cutting her daughter's face over a real estate dispute was not an accident but an inevitability, you have to go back 8 years. I was 24 years old then, working as a junior analyst for a commercial brokerage downtown. I spent my days making spreadsheets for men who thought a cap rate was a type of hat, and my nights staring at the ceiling of a studio apartment that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage from the neighbors next door. I knew I had the eye for value. I could walk into a dilapidated warehouse and see the luxury lofts hiding inside the brickwork, while my bosses only saw a demolition cost. I wanted out. I wanted to build something that had my name on the deed, not just my initials on the bottom of a memo. So I founded Skyline Crest Properties. The name sounded majestic, evoking images of glass towers and boardrooms. In reality, Skyline Crest was just me, a refurbished laptop, and a terrifying amount of ambition. I found a distressed 4-unit building in a transitioning neighborhood. A perfect starter project. The numbers worked. The potential return on investment was over 30%. It was a guaranteed win. But banks do not lend money on ambition. They lend on history. And I had none. I went to 5 different lenders. Every loan officer told me the same thing. The deal is solid, Harper, but you are a ghost. You have no assets. You have no collateral. You need a guarantor. You need a co-signer with a net worth that can absorb the risk. That was the first time I made a deal with the devil. I sat in my parents' living room, the old house, before they downsized to the townhouse, and laid out the business plan on the coffee table. My father, Greg, watched the football game with the volume turned down, nodding vaguely at my charts, but Marianne was listening. She was watching me with that hawk-like intensity she reserved for things she could use. She agreed to co-sign the loan. She also wrote a personal check for $20,000 to cover the closing costs and immediate renovations. It felt like salvation at the time. I was so desperate to start that I ignored the way she phrased it. "We are going to do great things with this," she had said, sliding the check across the mahogany table. "This is for the family, a nest egg for all of us." "It is a loan, Mom," I had corrected her, my voice firm even then. "I will pay you back with interest." "Oh, hush," she waved her hand, the diamonds on her fingers catching the lamplight. Different diamonds then, but the same gesture. "We do not need to be so transactional. We are family. What is mine is yours, and what is yours is the family's. That is how it works." She signed the guarantee documents without reading them. For the next 2 years, I did not sleep. I worked the renovation myself to save money, tearing up carpet until my hands were blistered and painting walls until the fumes made me dizzy. But the physical labor was nothing compared to the psychological warfare I was waging against my own ignorance. I knew Marianne. I knew that family money came with invisible strings that would eventually turn into a noose. I spent my nights lying on the floor of my tiny apartment, surrounded by stacks of legal books I had checked out from the library. I read about limited liability companies. I read about operating agreements. I learned the difference between a member, a manager, and a silent investor. I learned about piercing the corporate veil. I realized with a sinking feeling that my mother viewed her signature on that bank loan not as a favor, but as an acquisition. Every time we spoke during those early years, she dropped little hints. "You know, Harper," she would say over the phone while I was negotiating with plumbers, "women really should not take on so much risk. It ages you. Why don't you let me handle the paperwork? You know I'm good at organizing. You just focus on the pretty colors for the walls." She wanted access. She wanted her name on the bank accounts. She wanted to be the registered agent, so the legal mail would go to her house, giving her the power to intercept information. "I have it handled, Mom," I would say, clamping the phone between my shoulder and ear while I reviewed invoices. "You are being stubborn," she would sigh. "I am just trying to protect you. If this all goes wrong, who is going to clean up the mess? Me. So I should have a say." That fear drove me. I turned that 4-unit building around in record time. I rented it out at top market value, refinanced the loan based on the new appraisal, and pulled out enough cash to pay off the original debt. The day I wrote the check to Marianne was the proudest day of my life. It was for $22,000, the principal plus 10% interest. I wanted zero ambiguity. I drove to her house and placed it in her hand. "Thank you for the help," I said. "This clears the debt." She looked at the check, and for a split second, I saw a flash of anger. She didn't want the money. She wanted the leverage, but she smiled that tight, plastic smile. "You are such a good girl," she said, folding the check. "But you did not have to rush. We are partners." "No," I said. "We are mother and daughter, and now, business is concluded." I did not stop there. I dragged her to a notary public the next day under the guise of updating the bank records. I had prepared a document, a release of interest. It stated clearly that Marianne Riley had been repaid in full, had no equity in Skyline Crest Properties, and resigned from any implied role as an advisor or officer. She signed it because she didn't think it mattered. To Marianne, legal documents were just annoyances that could be overruled by emotional manipulation later. She signed it while complaining about the parking meter outside. "You are so dramatic with your little forms, Harper," she said as the notary stamped the page, "as if a piece of paper changes who we are." I filed that paper with the state the next morning. With the slate clean, I swung for the fences. I used the profits from the first building to put a down payment on a derelict textile factory by the river. Everyone called it a money pit. I called it Riverside 220 Lofts. This was the project that made me. I did it alone, no co-signers, no family money, just me, the bank, and my reputation. I transformed that rotting brick hulk into the most desirable residential address in the city. The penthouse I was standing in now was the crown jewel of that renovation. I thought I was safe. I thought I had built a fortress that Marianne couldn't breach because her name wasn't on a single brick. But I had underestimated her. While I was building walls, she was digging tunnels. Over the last year, the dynamic had shifted. She stopped criticizing and started praising. She became proud. She started calling me just to chat. But the questions were always specific. "So, how much does the commercial unit on the ground floor go for these days?" she would ask casually while we were shopping for shoes. "About $80 a square foot," I would answer, distracted. "And the occupancy rate? Is it full?" 95%, I would say, proud of the number. "That is wonderful, sweetie. And who is the lawyer you use again?" "That nice man, Alan. He seems very sharp." I gave her the answers. I fed her the data. I thought she was finally taking an interest in my life. I thought she was finally respecting me as a peer. I was a fool. She wasn't taking an interest. She was conducting an audit. She was building a valuation of my company in her head, calculating exactly how much family wealth I was hoarding. She was feeding this information to my brother Blake and my sister Tessa, painting a picture of me as the dragon sitting on a pile of gold that rightfully belonged to the village. I looked at the mirror again. The bleeding had slowed to a heavy ooze. The cut was deep, a clean line running from my cheekbone down toward my jaw. It would scar. I lowered the towel and reached into the pocket of my blazer. My fingers closed around the cold, hard stone I had swiped from the floor. I pulled it out. The diamond sat in my palm, catching the harsh bathroom light. It was a marquise cut, sharp at both ends, like a little glass boat or a knife. Marianne loved this ring. She bragged about it constantly. She told everyone it was a custom piece, insured for $250,000. She had listed it on her personal financial statement as a major asset. And that was when the memory hit me. I remembered a lunch we had 6 months ago. Marianne had been complaining about cash flow, or rather, the lack of it for the lavish vacation she wanted to take. She had made a joke, a throwaway comment over her salad. "You know, sometimes things just get lost," she had said, twisting the ring on her finger. "And insurance companies have such deep pockets, they hardly notice." I stared at the stone. If this diamond was here, in my hand, then it was not lost. But if Marianne had needed money recently, money to perhaps hire a lawyer to draft the bogus partnership claims she had waved in my face tonight, where would she get it? My mind raced back to the paperwork I had studied on the floor of my apartment. I remembered the clauses about fraud. I remembered the sections on unclean hands, inequitable disputes. I carefully wrapped the diamond in a piece of tissue paper and shoved it deep into the inner pocket of my blazer. The $20,000 she gave me years ago was the bait. The family dinners were the trap. But this stone, this tiny glittering shard of carbon, this was the key to the cage. She had slapped me to show power. She had cut me to show dominance. She thought she had marked me as her property. I unlocked the bathroom door. The sounds of the party had died down, replaced by the hushed, urgent whispers of a conspiracy in progress. They were probably already dividing the furniture. I walked out, not as the victim holding a towel to her face, but as the CEO of Skyline Crest Properties. They wanted to play a game of ownership? Fine, but they had forgotten the first rule of real estate. Always check the foundation before you try to knock down the house, because sometimes the person you are trying to evict owns the ground you are standing on, and they have the dynamite to bring the whole thing down. To understand the sheer audacity of the slap and the diamond now burning a hole in my pocket, we have to rewind the clock by 6 hours. We have to go back to the moment the invasion began, before a single drop of blood hit the floor. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. I was sitting in my office on the ground floor of the Riverside 220 lofts, the space I had carved out for Skyline Crest Properties. The office was my sanctuary: soundproof glass, polished concrete floors, and a view of the river that usually calmed my nerves. I was reviewing tenant applications for the 3rd floor, the most lucrative commercial space in the building, which was currently leased to a quiet, high-paying tech firm. My phone buzzed. It was Nora, my half-sister. Nora was the only one in the family I tolerated. She was 10 years younger, soft-spoken, and usually tried to stay out of Marianne's blast radius. But when I answered, her voice was trembling. "Harper, you need to check the family group chat, right now." I muted that chat 3 years ago. "Nora," I said, flipping a page in a lease agreement. "Why? Did Blake get arrested again?" "No," Nora whispered, and I could hear echoes in the background, the distinct, hollow echo of a large, empty room. "They are here. They are in the building." My hand froze over the paperwork. Who is in the building? Everyone. Mom, Dad, Blake, Tessa, Harper. They are in the penthouse. Mom has a key. She said you gave it to her for emergencies. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had never given Marianne a key. The only spare key was in a lockbox in the security office, reserved for the fire department. I unlocked my phone and opened the dormant group chat. It had been renamed from Riley Family Updates to Skyline Estate Planning. The photos bombarded me. There was a selfie of Marianne standing in the center of my living room, the same room where she would later slap me, holding a glass of wine that she must have brought herself. The caption read, "Finally taking possession of what we built. Fairness at last." There was a video of Blake pacing around the 3rd-floor commercial suite, the one currently occupied by paying tenants. He was holding a tape measure against the wall. "Perfect light for the art studio," he had typed. "Just need to knock out these cubicles." There was a photo of Tessa's toddlers running down the hallway of the 2nd floor, screaming. The twins loved their new playroom. They weren't just visiting, they were colonizing. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over. I didn't bother picking it up. I dialed Derek, my building manager and head of security. "Derek," I said, my voice shaking with a cold rage. "Why is my family in the penthouse? And why is my brother measuring the 3rd floor?" "Ms. Riley?" Derek sounded confused. "Your mother?" She came in with a stack of papers. She showed the concierge a deed of trust. She said there was a board meeting today. She had a key. "I am the board," I snapped. "There is no meeting. Derek, listen to me carefully. I want you to override the elevator controls. Lock them down. No one goes up, and no one comes down until I get there. This is a security breach. But she has papers, Derek stammered. She has a document that says she is a managing partner. Those papers are forged or expired, I said, grabbing my blazer. Do not let them leave. I am calling Alan. I hung up and dialed Alan Pierce, my attorney. He picked up on the first ring. Alan, I said, walking out of my office and heading toward the main lobby. Bring the Skyline corporate binder. Bring the deed to Riverside. Bring the operating agreement. Meet me in the lobby in 10 minutes. Harper? Alan's voice was sharp. What is happening? A hostile takeover, I said, from inside the house. I marched across the courtyard that separated my office from the main residential tower. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from a sense of violation so profound it made my skin crawl. They weren't just greedy, they were delusional. They were walking through my life, picking out rooms like they were shopping for fruit, completely ignoring the fact that I existed. When I pushed through the revolving doors of the main lobby, I stopped dead in my tracks. The lobby, usually a minimalist space of cool gray stone and abstract art, had been transformed. There was a banner taped to the expensive Venetian plaster wall. It read, in cheerful cursive font, Riley Family Estate Planning Dinner. A catering cart was parked near the concierge desk. A man I didn't recognize, looking like a budget accountant, was sitting on one of the lobby sofas with a notepad, taking inventory of the furniture. And there, standing by the elevator banks, was the welcoming committee. Marianne. She was wearing a white silk dress that cost more than my first car. She looked radiant. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom. Beside her, my father looked sheepish, holding a stack of files. Blake was leaning against the wall, scrolling on his phone, looking bored. I walked toward them. The click of my heels on the marble floor echoed like gunshots. What is this? I asked. My voice was low, but it carried. Marianne looked up, her face lighting up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Harper, finally, we were wondering when you would join the party. We started the walkthrough without you. There is no walkthrough, I said, stopping 5 feet from her. Why is there a banner on my wall? Why did you lie to my security guards? Lie? Marianne scoffed, touching her chest lightly. I didn't lie. I told them the truth. I told them the co-founder was here to inspect the assets. You are not a co-founder, I said, fighting the urge to scream. We settled this 8 years ago. You have no stake in Skyline Crest. You have no stake in this building. Oh, Harper, she sighed, shaking her head as if I were a slow child. You really need to read the fine print. That loan you paid back? That was just the operational capital. It didn't void the original intent of the partnership. She snapped her fingers at my father. Greg fumbled with the files and handed her a document. It was a photocopy of the original LLC formation paperwork from a decade ago, the one where she was listed as the registered agent because I didn't have a permanent address yet. See, she said, waving the paper in the air. My name, right there, first line. That is a registered agent filing. Mom, I said, my hands balling into fists. It means you accept mail. It doesn't mean you own equity, and you signed a release form. I have it. Alan is bringing it. Alan, she said dismissively. That shark. He confuses you with legal jargon. But family law is different. It is about contribution. It is about who made you who you are. Blake chimed in, not looking up from his phone. Just give it up. Harp, we found the emails, the ones where you said, I couldn't do this without you, Mom. That is a verbal contract, intent to share. I looked at them. They had dug through 10-year-old emails. They had hired a forensic accountant, the man on the sofa, to build a case based on sentiment and twisted logic. They had planned this. While I was working 18-hour days to buy this building, they were building a dossier to steal it. Get out, I said. All of you, get out of my building. We are not going anywhere, Marianne said, her voice dropping the sweet facade. She took a step closer. We are going upstairs to the penthouse to have dinner, to celebrate our future. And you are going to come with us. And you are going to sign the restructuring agreement Dad has drafted. Or... She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Or what? I challenged her. Or we go to the press, she whispered, her eyes gleaming. We tell everyone that the successful Sage Riley defrauded her own mother, that she used family money to build an empire and then kicked her elderly parents to the curb. How will that look to your investors? To the bank? I stared at her. It was blackmail, pure and simple. You are bluffing, I said. Marianne smiled, and that was when she raised her hand to tuck a stray hair behind her ear. The diamond ring flashed under the lobby lights, the same ring that, hours later, would cut my face. I never bluff about my children's future, she said. Now, be a good girl. The caterers are waiting upstairs. Don't make a scene in front of the staff. She turned and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. Derek hadn't locked them in time, or perhaps Marianne had bullied him into unlocking them before I arrived. I watched them file into the elevator. My father, my brother, my sister. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and expectation. They expected me to fold. They expected me to get in that elevator and surrender, just like I always did when I was a child. I stood there for a long moment. I could have called the police right then. I could have had them dragged out for trespassing. But Marianne was right about one thing. The scandal would be damaging. Investors hate drama. A public feud with my elderly mother could tank the refinancing deal I was working on. I had to play this carefully. I had to let them think they had the upper hand, at least for tonight. I stepped into the elevator just as the doors were closing. Fine, I said, staring straight ahead at the steel doors. Let's have dinner. Marianne patted my arm. That's my girl. I knew you would see reason. I didn't flinch at her touch, but inside, I was screaming. I wasn't going up there to surrender. I was going up there to buy time until Alan arrived. But I didn't know then how far she would go. I didn't know that in less than 2 hours, the negotiation would turn into a physical assault. I didn't know that the ring she was flaunting as a symbol of her status was about to become the weapon that would give me everything I needed to destroy her. The elevator chimed. The doors opened to the penthouse. Welcome home, Marianne said, stepping out into my living room as if she had lived there for years. I followed her, my eyes fixing on the estate planning banner they had hung over the fireplace, and I felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. This wasn't a dinner. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that cut through the thick tension of the living room, and Alan Pierce stepped out. He looked exactly as I had hoped he would, clinically detached, impeccably dressed in charcoal wool, and carrying a leather binder that looked heavy enough to crush a skull. The festive chatter of my relatives died instantly. My cousin, who had been loudly debating where to put a pool table, froze with a shrimp cocktail halfway to his mouth. Marianne, however, did not flinch. She stood her ground in the center of the room, her chin raised, clutching her glass of champagne like a scepter. Alan walked straight to me, ignoring the hostile glares from the sofa. He placed the binder on the kitchen island with a decisive thud. Harper. He nodded, then turned to face the room. I am Alan Pierce, legal counsel for Skyline Crest Properties and Miss Riley. I have been informed that there is some confusion regarding the ownership of this building. There is no confusion, Marianne said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She walked over to the island, placing a single sheet of paper next to Alan's binder. We are just clarifying the family structure. As you can see, I am a founding member. I looked down at the paper she had presented. It was a document I hadn't seen in years. The Articles of Organization for the LLC. Her finger, manicured and adorned with that massive diamond ring, tapped aggressively on a specific line. Registered Agent, Marianne Riley, she read aloud, beaming at the silent audience of aunts and uncles. That means I am the legal face of the company. It means I have authority. A murmur of agreement went through the room. Blake nodded sagely, as if he understood corporate law. It is right there in black and white. Harp, you can't argue with government documents. Alan adjusted his glasses, his expression bored. Mrs. Riley, a registered agent is merely a point of contact for service of process. It is a mailbox. It conveys absolutely no ownership, no equity, and no decision-making power. It is the legal equivalent of a secretary. Marianne's smile faltered, but only for a second. That is a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of statute, Alan corrected her. Opening his binder, he flipped past the tab labeled Ownership. Here is the operating agreement, dated 8 years ago. It lists Sage Riley as the sole member with 100% interest. And here, he turned another page, is the amendment of articles filed with the Secretary of State 6 months after incorporation. He spun the binder around so everyone could see. This document removes Marianne Riley as registered agent and replaces her with my law firm. It is signed by you, Mrs. Riley, and right underneath it is a copy of a cashier's check for $22,000, payable to you, with the memo line reading repayment of loan in full, final settlement. The room went dead silent. The evidence was irrefutable. It was projected there on the heavy bond paper, her signature, the check, the dates. It was a complete dismantling of her narrative. Marianne stared at the binder. Her face turned a blotchy shade of red. She realized the legal ground was crumbling beneath her heels. So she did what she always did. She abandoned logic and dove headfirst into emotion. "I didn't know what I was signing," she cried out, her voice breaking with practiced theatricality. She looked around at her sister, my Aunt Linda, with wide, watery eyes. "Harper brought me these papers. She said it was just routine tax forms. She said, 'Mom, just sign this so I don't get audited.' I trusted her. I didn't know she was writing me out of my own legacy." "That is a lie," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking at my sides. "We went to a notary. You complained about the parking for 20 minutes. You read every line. Mom." "I am an old woman," she shrieked, ignoring the fact that she was only 58 and did Pilates 4 times a week. "I don't understand these legal tricks. You took advantage of me. You used my money. And then you tricked me into signing away my rights." "That is awful," Aunt Linda whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "To trick your own mother." Blake pushed off the wall, sensing the momentum shifting back to their side. He walked into the center of the room, playing the role of the protective son. "It is not just about the paper, Alan," Blake said, puffing out his chest. "Skyline Crest was built in this family's dining room. We had meetings every Sunday night. We discussed strategy. We talked about which neighborhoods to target. Those were board meetings, verbal contracts. We all contributed intellectual property." I stared at him, incredulous. "Board meetings? Blake, you are talking about the nights I came over for lasagna and you asked me to borrow $50 for gas. You never contributed a single idea to this company. You told me buying the textile factory was stupid." "I was playing devil's advocate," Blake shouted. "That is consulting. That is partnership." The gaslighting was suffocating. They were rewriting history in real time, twisting my years of isolation and hard work into a collaborative family project. They were stealing my past to claim my future. I looked down at the paper Marianne had placed on the counter, the one claiming she was the registered agent. Something caught my eye. The document was supposed to be 8 years old. It should have been slightly yellowed, perhaps creased from being in a filing cabinet, but the paper was stark white. The edges were razor sharp. The toner was dark and fresh. I reached out and touched it. It was still warm. "This is a fresh print," I said, looking up at Marianne. "What?" she snapped. "You didn't find this in your old files," I said, realizing the depth of the premeditation. "You went to the state records online. You downloaded the initial filing, the only one that ever had your name on it, and you printed it out today. You ignored the 6 subsequent filings that removed you. You curated this. You built a prop." I looked around the room at the printed banner. The accountant taking notes. The family photos they had framed and brought with them to place on my mantel. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said, my voice rising. "This is a heist. You planned this. You have been planning this for weeks." Marianne's eyes narrowed. The mask of the weeping victim slipped, revealing the cold operator underneath. She knew I had caught her. "Derek," I said, turning to the security manager who had come up with Alan. "Clear the room, now. Anyone who doesn't leave gets arrested for trespassing." "You can't do that," Tessa screamed from the hallway, clutching her toddler. "This is Grandma's house." "It is not," I said. "It is my house. Get out." Derek stepped forward, his hand resting on his radio. "Folks, please, don't make me call the precinct. The elevators are waiting." The relatives began to shuffle, looking between Marianne and the large security guard. Self-preservation kicked in. They started grabbing their purses and coats, avoiding eye contact with me. Marianne did not move. She stood trembling with rage, her plans disintegrating, her audience leaving, her humiliation complete. "You ungrateful brat," she hissed, stepping into my personal space. "After everything I sacrificed, you think a few pieces of paper make you the owner? I am your mother. I own you." "You own nothing," I said, meeting her gaze. "Not this building, not this company, and certainly not me." That was the moment, the snap, the loss of control. She screamed, a raw, frustration-filled sound, and swung her hand. The impact was the explosion I had described before, the ring connecting with bone, the blood, the shock. But this time, as I stumbled back and the room gasped, I saw the mechanics of it. I saw Blake smirk before he feigned concern. I saw the accountant stop writing and close his notebook, knowing his job was done. And I saw the diamond fall. It bounced once on the hardwood floor and settled near my boot. A tiny, sparkling piece of debris from the collision between her delusion and my reality. When I bent down to pick it up, pretending to be cowed, pretending to be the beaten daughter, the room was already emptying. Derek was firmly escorting the last of the cousins out. Marianne was being pulled away by my father, shouting threats over her shoulder about lawsuits and ungrateful children. "I will ruin you," she screamed as the elevator doors began to close. "You will be back in the gutter without me." Then the doors shut, and silence slammed back into the penthouse. I stood there, holding the towel to my cheek, the diamond burning in my pocket. The banner reading Riley Family Estate Planning had come loose at one corner and was dangling sadly from the wall. Alan stood by the island, watching me. He didn't offer empty comforts. He didn't ask if I was okay. He was a lawyer, and he was already calculating the next move. "They won't stop. Harper," Alan said, his voice quiet but grave. "They just lost the skirmish, but they declared war. They will find loopholes. They will use the press. They will sue for implied partnership and drag this out for years to drain your resources." I looked at the blood on the towel. I touched the lump in my pocket. "Let them try," I said. Alan pointed to the floor where the diamond had been. He hadn't seen me take it, but he had seen the ring strike me. "That cut will need stitches," he said, "and photographs. Tonight, every text message they sent, every forged document they brought, every drop of blood on this floor, it is all evidence now." He paused, looking at the door where my family had just exited. "They think they are fighting a daughter," Alan said. "We need to show them they are fighting a CEO." I nodded, feeling the cold, hard edges of the stone in my pocket against my hip. "They want a share of the profits?" I whispered to the empty room. "They are going to get exactly what they earned." 72 hours after the dinner that ended in blood. My phone vibrated itself off the nightstand at 6 a.m. It hit the floor with a thud, but it kept buzzing. It sounded like an angry hornet trapped against the hardwood. I rolled over, my hand instinctively going to the bandage on my left cheek. The throbbing had dulled to a persistent ache, a constant reminder of the ring that had cut me. I picked up the phone, squinting against the harsh blue light of the screen. There were 43 missed text messages, 12 missed calls, and hundreds of notifications from Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. My stomach dropped. In my line of work, a sudden flood of notifications usually meant a building had caught fire or a retaining wall had collapsed. I sat up, heart hammering against my ribs, and unlocked the screen. It was not a structural collapse. It was a character assassination. At the top of the feed was a post from Marianne. She had uploaded a photo of herself, one taken years ago, where she looked younger and softer, gazing out a window with a melancholic expression. The caption read, "It is a heavy burden for a mother to realize she raised a child who values money over blood. I spent 30 years building a foundation for my family, pouring my savings and my soul into a company I thought we shared. To be physically removed from the building I helped create, by security guards hired with my own investment, my heart is shattered. I only wanted to secure a legacy for my children. I did not know I was raising a shark who would eat her own parents." It had 350 reactions. Most were the sad emoji. The comments were a toxic sludge of sympathy. "So sorry you are going through this. Marianne, ungrateful kids these days have no idea what we sacrificed. Shame on her. Karma will get her." I felt a wave of nausea. She had carefully omitted the violence. She had omitted the fact that she struck me. She had painted herself as the frail, ousted founder and me as the corporate monster. But it got worse. I clicked on a tag and found a video posted by Blake. It was a masterpiece of editing. He had taken the footage from the night of the invasion, footage he had filmed on his phone while they were measuring my walls, and spliced it into a 30-second reel. It showed Marianne laughing and pointing at the view. It showed my father smiling as he held a blueprint. It showed Tessa's kids running playfully in the hallway. The music overlay was soft, sentimental piano. Then, there was a hard cut to black, with white text. "When you build an empire together, and she locks the doors once the money rolls in." He had cut out the screaming. He had cut out the arrival of the security guards. He had cut out the slap. I switched apps to LinkedIn, hoping the professional world was immune to this suburban drama. I was wrong. A link had been shared by the Metro Business Daily, a local blog that covered real estate news. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Co-founder, mom ousted. Skyline Crest, CO accused of pushing family out of $1 million portfolio." They had used a stock photo of me from a ribbon-cutting ceremony 2 years ago, placed side by side with a blurry screenshot of Marianne's emotional Facebook post. I threw the covers off and paced the room. This was not just embarrassing. This was dangerous. In real estate, reputation is currency. If investors thought I was unstable, or worse, legally entangled in a messy family ownership dispute, they would run. As if on cue, my email pinged. It was from Robert Vance, the senior loan officer at First National Bank. We were in the middle of negotiating a refinancing deal for the Riverside building, a deal I needed to lower the interest rates and free up capital for the next project. "Harper." The email read, "We have received some concerning inquiries regarding a potential litigation involving the ownership structure of Skyline Crest. As you know, the bank requires clear title and full disclosure of any partnership disputes. We are pausing the underwriting process until this is clarified. Please call me." I let out a scream of frustration that echoed in the empty penthouse. They were doing it. They were choking my cash flow. They didn't need to win in court. They just needed to make enough noise to scare the money away. I dialed Alan. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and devoid of sleep. "I saw it," Alan said before I could speak. "They are destroying me." "Alan," I said, my voice shaking. "The bank just paused the refinance. 3 tenants on the waiting list just emailed to cancel their viewings. They think I am stealing from my mother." "Breathe," Alan commanded. "This is the court of public opinion. It is loud, but it is not legal. We need to respond. But we do not respond with emotion. We respond with paper." "Silence is not working," I argued, pacing past the mirror, catching a glimpse of the angry red line on my cheek. "If I say nothing, her story becomes the truth." "Exactly," Alan agreed. "That is why you are coming to my office in 1 hour. We are going to draft a cease and desist order for defamation, and we are going to send a demand letter to that blog. They printed a claim about a co-founder without verifying the corporate records. That is libel." I dressed in 5 minutes. I chose a sharp black suit, armor for the modern battlefield. As I reached for my blazer, which was draped over the chair where I had left it the night of the incident, my hand brushed against the pocket. I felt it, the hard, distinct lump of the diamond. I paused. My fingers curled around the stone through the fabric. I hadn't looked at it since I put it there. I hadn't wanted to. It felt like a radioactive isotope, something that would burn me if I handled it too much. But now, with the accusations of greed and theft ringing in my ears, my mind shifted. Marianne loved this ring. She loved it more than she loved this apartment. She had told me once that it was her retirement plan if everything else went to hell. I pulled the diamond out. It sat in my palm, cold and indifferent. I thought about the insurance. Marianne was obsessive about insuring her assets. She had insured her car, her fur coats, even her collection of porcelain dolls. If she had lost a stone from a ring worth, allegedly, $50,000, she would have filed a claim immediately. But she hadn't. Or had she? A memory surfaced from a year ago. I was at her house for Thanksgiving. She was complaining about cash flow because my father's pension check was late. Then, 2 weeks later, she suddenly had the cash to go on a cruise to the Mediterranean. When I asked how they afforded it, she had been vague. "Oh, a little windfall came through," she had said. I looked at the stone again. "Diamonds are not just jewelry to you, are they, Mom?" I whispered to the empty room. "They are currency. They are insurance." If she had claimed this stone was lost a year ago to get an insurance payout, and yet, here it was, falling out of her ring 3 nights ago, that was insurance fraud. That was a felony. I put the diamond back in my pocket, but this time, I didn't feel like I was hiding a stolen object. I felt like I was carrying a loaded gun. I arrived at Alan's office at 8:30. He had already printed out the blog post and highlighted the actionable phrases in yellow marker. "Here is the strategy," Alan said, sliding a document across the mahogany desk. "We send this to the blog editor. We attach the articles of organization, the settlement agreement she signed 8 years ago, and the canceled check. We inform them that referring to Marianne Riley as a co-founder or owner is factually incorrect and damaging to your business. We give them 2 hours to retract, or we file suit for damages." "And the family?" I asked, sitting down. "We send cease and desist letters to Marianne and Blake," Alan said. "We remind them that the non-disclosure clause in the settlement agreement they signed, yes, I put one in there 8 years ago, prohibits them from discussing the internal financials of Skyline Crest." I watched him work. It was precise. It was brutal. It was the only language these people understood. "Alan," I said, leaning forward, "what if we have something else? Something that speaks to her credibility regarding financial assets?" Alan looked up over his glasses. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. I wasn't ready to show him the diamond yet. It felt too volatile. If I revealed it now, it became evidence in a messy theft accusation against me. I needed to be sure about the insurance angle first. "Just hypothetical," I said. "If someone lies on financial documents, insurance forms, for example, does that help us?" Alan's eyes sharpened. "If you can prove a pattern of financial dishonesty, it destroys her credibility as a witness. If she claims she owns your company, but we can prove she lies to banks or insurers to get money, a judge will throw out her testimony in a heartbeat." He held my gaze for a long second, sensing I was holding back, but he didn't push. "One step at a time. Harper, let's kill the blog post first." By noon, the tide began to turn. The blog editor, terrified of a lawsuit from a well-funded real estate firm, took the post down. They replaced it with a terse correction. Clarification: Marianne Riley is not a shareholder or officer of Skyline Crest Properties. We regret the error. That was the first blow. Then, around 2 in the afternoon, Blake's video disappeared from Instagram. Alan's letter had likely reached him, threatening to sue him for using unauthorized footage of a private commercial property. Blake was a bully, and like all bullies, he folded the moment someone stood up to him. But Marianne was different. At 4 o'clock, she posted again. She didn't mention the company. She didn't mention the building. She didn't mention legal ownership. She wrote, "I may not have the fancy papers or the high-priced lawyers. I may have signed things I did not understand because I trusted my daughter, but a mother knows what is in her heart. A mother knows who held the ladder while her child climbed, and a mother knows the pain of being kicked down that ladder once the child reaches the top." It was brilliant. It was evil. She had pivoted from a legal claim to a moral one. She was stripping away the facts that I could disprove and wrapping herself in an emotion that I couldn't sue. I sat in my office, watching the comments roll in. People were still siding with her. They didn't care about the LLC papers. They cared about the narrative of the poor, discarded mother. I realized then that Alan was only half right. We could win the legal battle. We could prove I owned the building, but she would burn my reputation to the ground just to keep warm. She would turn the entire town against me, one sob story at a time. I needed more than a cease and desist. I needed to expose her, not as a confused mother, but as a calculated fraud. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the diamond. I held it up to the light of the setting sun streaming through my office window. I needed to know where this stone came from. I needed to know its history. I picked up my phone and dialed Lena, an old friend from college who now worked as a gemologist for a high-end appraiser in the jewelry district. "Harper?" Lena answered, surprised. "Long time." "I need a favor." "Lena," I said, my voice low. "I have a stone. I need you to look at it. Tonight." "Is everything okay?" she asked. "No," I said, staring at the glittering shard of carbon that had cost me a piece of my face. "But I think I found the receipt for my misery, and I need to know who paid for it." I hung up and grabbed my bag. The defensive war was over. I was done reacting to their posts and their lies. It was time to start my own investigation. The Diamond District was a fortress of steel gates and security cameras, a stark contrast to the chaotic, emotional battlefield of social media I had left behind in my office. The air smelled of rain and exhaust as I buzzed the intercom for Vault and Verse, the boutique appraisal firm owned by my college friend, Lena. The heavy door clicked open. I stepped inside, shaking the drizzle from my coat. Lena was waiting for me at her workbench, surrounded by the clinical tools of her trade, microscopes, scales, and high-intensity lamps that left no shadow unexposed. She looked up, pushing her magnification visor onto her forehead. "You look like you have been through a war." "Harper," Lena said, her eyes lingering on the bandage on my cheek. "I have," I replied, walking over to the counter, "and I think I brought home a souvenir." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the tissue paper. I unfolded it slowly, revealing the marquise-cut diamond. Under the harsh laboratory lights, it looked less like a piece of jewelry and more like a cold, hard truth waiting to be spoken. "Take a look," I said. "I need to know what I am dealing with." Lena picked up the stone with a pair of tweezers. She didn't ask questions about where it came from or why I had it. That was why I liked Lena. She understood that in our world, assets often changed hands in complicated ways. She placed the diamond on the scale first. 0.8 carats, she murmured, noting it down. "Good clarity, likely VS1 or VVS2. Color is excellent, probably an E or an F." She moved the stone to the microscope platform and adjusted the focus knobs. I stood silently, listening to the hum of the ventilation system. My phone vibrated in my bag. Probably another notification about my mother's heartbreak, but I ignored it. "Standard cut," Lena narrated, peering through the lenses. "A few minor inclusions near the culée, but nothing that affects structural integrity. Wait." The room went silent. Lena stopped adjusting the focus and leaned in closer. "What is it?" I asked. "There is an inscription," Lena said. "It is laser-etched on the girdle. You would never see it with the naked eye." "A serial number?" "Yes, but not just a grading report number," Lena explained, her voice tightening with professional curiosity. This looks like a registry number for a specific insurance portfolio. High-value coverage often requires the stones to be laser-tagged for identification in case of recovery. She pulled back from the microscope and turned to her computer. "Read it to me," she said. Opening a database that I knew was not accessible to the general public, it was a shared ledger used by insurers and appraisers to track high-end inventory. I looked through the eyepiece. The numbers were ghostly faint, etched into the rim of the diamond like a secret code. LG49227 Alpha, I read. Lina typed the sequence in. The sound of her mechanical keyboard was the only noise in the room. She hit enter. A moment passed. Then, a file popped up on the screen. Lina froze. She looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "Harper," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "This stone is listed as part of a custom set. A platinum ring with a 3-carat center stone and 6 marquise accents, matching earrings, and a pendant." "Who is the owner?" I asked, though a cold knot was already forming in my stomach. "The policyholder is Marianne Riley," Lina said. I closed my eyes. Of course. "And the value?" I asked. "The set was appraised and insured for $85,000, Lina read. "But that is not the interesting part." She turned the monitor so I could see it. There was a red banner across the top of the file. Status, claim settled, theft, Naples, Italy, 11 months ago. The air left the room. I stared at the screen. The words, "Claim settled," burned into my retinas. "She reported it stolen," I said, my voice flat. "She went on a Mediterranean cruise last year. She came back saying she had been pickpocketed in a market in Naples. She said she lost her camera and her jewelry pouch." "Well," Lina said, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms, "unless the pickpocket broke into your house and dropped this stone on your floor 3 days ago, she lied." I pieced the timeline together in my head. It was terrifyingly simple. Marianne had taken out a massive policy on the jewelry. She had gone to Italy. She had reported a theft that never happened, filed a police report in a foreign language that she knew no one would double-check rigorously, and then claimed the insurance payout. $85,000. That explained the windfall she had used to pay for the cruise. That explained why she had been so desperate for cash recently. She had spent the fraud money and needed a new source. But she hadn't sold the jewelry. She had kept it. She was arrogant enough, or sentimental enough, to keep the ring. She probably thought that by resetting the stones or just wearing it inside family gatherings, no one would notice. "She is wearing the evidence of a felony on her hand," I whispered. "If she filed a claim and kept the stones," Lina said, her face serious, "that is insurance fraud. It is grand larceny. Harper, if the insurance company finds out you have this, they will want it, and they will want her." I reached out and took the diamond from the microscope stage. It felt heavier now. It wasn't just a rock anymore. It was a prison sentence. "Can you print that report for me?" I asked. "But don't flag it in the system. Just print it." Lina nodded. She understood. She hit print, and the paper slid out of the machine. A single sheet that reduced my mother's moral high ground to ash. I walked out of the shop 10 minutes later and sat in my car. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon. I dialed Alan. "Tell me you have good news," Alan said when he answered, "because Blake just posted a TikTok crying about how he can't afford rent because family politics shut down his studio plans." "Alan," I said, staring at the diamond in my hand, "Marianne didn't just lie about the company. She lies to everyone, including her insurance carrier." I explained what Lina had found. I told him about the serial number, the claim from Naples, the $85,000 she had pocketed while still wearing the ring. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You are certain?" Alan asked finally. "The serial number matches?" 100%, I said. "I have the printout." "Harper," Alan said, and I could hear the shift in his tone. He wasn't speaking as my corporate counsel anymore. He was speaking as a litigator who just realized he had been handed a nuclear weapon. "This is not just leverage. This is a silver bullet. If we introduce this into the record, Her credibility ceases to exist. A woman who defrauds an insurance company for $85,000 cannot be trusted when she claims she entered a verbal contract for a multi-million-dollar building. I know, I said. We could go to the district attorney, Alan continued, thinking out loud. We could file a countersuit for fraud. We could end this tomorrow. She would be facing jail time. Harper, minimum mandatory sentences for fraud over $50,000 are not a joke. I looked at the rain sliding down the windshield. Jail. I thought about Marianne sitting in a cell. I thought about the humiliation. I thought about my father, who was complicit by silence, but probably too weak to have masterminded it. But then I thought about the slap. I touched my cheek. I thought about the way she had looked at me in the lobby. The entitlement. The venom. I thought about the post she wrote today, weaponizing her motherhood to destroy my career. She had tried to take my license, my reputation, and my livelihood. She had drawn blood in my own home. She had not shown me mercy. She had not hesitated. No, I said to Alan. Not yet. Harper, Alan warned. You cannot sit on evidence of a crime indefinitely. That makes you an accessory. I am not sitting on it, I said, my voice hardening. I am holding it in reserve. If we release this now, the story becomes daughter sends mother to prison. She will spin it. She will say I framed her. She will say I planted the stone. I gripped the steering wheel. I need her to deny it first, I said. I need her to stand in a courtroom, under oath, and testify that she is an honest woman. I need her to say that she has never lied about money. I need her to commit perjury on top of the fraud. I want her to dig the hole so deep that when we drop this in, she can never climb out. Alan was silent for a moment. Then, he let out a short, impressed breath. You are cold, Harper, he said. I learned from the best, I replied. Okay, Alan said. We keep the diamond in the safe. We keep the report in the file. We let them proceed with their lawsuit. We let them file their affidavits. And we wait for the deposition. We wait, I agreed. I hung up the phone. I put the diamond back in the tissue paper, then into a small velvet pouch I had found in my glove compartment. I tucked it into my purse. I started the car. The engine purred to life, a sound of controlled power. For the first time since the slap, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel like the daughter scrambling to explain herself. I drove out of the Diamond District, heading back toward Riverside. Let them post on Facebook. Let them cry to the blogs. Let them tell the world I was a monster. I had the truth in my pocket, and it was sharp enough to cut through everything. Marianne had wanted a diamond to secure her future. Well, she got one, and it was going to cost her everything she actually owned. The envelope landed on my desk with a sound that was heavier than paper had any right to be. It was thick, creamy manila, and the return address was embossed in a pretentious navy blue font. Hanley and Associates, attorneys at law. Nora stood on the other side of my desk, her chest heaving as if she had run all the way from the suburbs. She was pale, her hands trembling where they gripped the strap of her purse. I stole it from the kitchen counter before Mom could mail it, Nora said, her voice barely a whisper. But it doesn't matter. The courier is already on his way with the official copy. This is just, I needed you to see it first. I reached out and opened the clasp. My fingers felt numb. I pulled out the stack of documents. The cover page was a summons. The title of the lawsuit was printed in bold, capital letters that seemed to scream at me from the page. Marianne. Riley, Blake Riley, and Tessa Riley v. Sage Riley and Skyline Crest Properties, LLC. I stared at the words, verses. For 30 years, I had thought the struggle was just dysfunction. I thought it was just bad parenting, or jealousy, or a clash of personalities. But looking at those names separated by that little V, I realized it was always a war. They had just finally made it official. I scanned the complaints. It wasn't just a dispute over the Riverside building. Plaintiff asserts an implied partnership existed from the inception of the company, I read aloud, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet office. Plaintiff claims that the defendant, Sage Riley, acted as a trustee for the family's collective interests, and is now in breach of fiduciary duty. They weren't just coming for the penthouse, they were coming for everything. They wanted a percentage of Skyline Crest. They wanted a cut of every building I had bought, every lease I had signed, every dollar I had made since I was 24 years old. They want 40%, Nora said, wiping a tear from her cheek. They did the math. They think 40% is fair because Mom signed that first loan. I paid that loan back, I snapped, slamming the paperwork down. 10 years ago. They don't care, Nora said. I picked up my phone and summoned Alan. He was already in the building, working on the defamation case. When he walked in and saw the paperwork, his face did not change, but his shoulders stiffened. He spent 10 minutes reading in silence. The only sound in the room was the turning of pages and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Victor Hanley, Alan said finally, tossing the packet back onto the desk. I should have known. He is a bottom feeder. He specializes in divorce of corporate entities. He takes messy family disputes and turns them into scorched earth litigation. Can they win? I asked. On the merits? No, Alan said, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. The statute of frauds is on our side. The written contracts are clear. The settlement agreement you signed with your mother is ironclad. But winning isn't their strategy here. Harper. Then what is? Look at page 12, Alan said. Paragraph 4. I flipped to the page. Plaintiff moves for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction to freeze all assets of Skyline Crest properties to prevent the dissipation of funds pending trial. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Dissipation of funds? I am running a business, not a casino. I pay mortgages. I pay contractors. Exactly, Pound said. And if a judge grants this... His phone rang. It was a sharp, jarring tone. Alan looked at the screen, and his expression went from serious to grim. He held up a finger, answering the call. Alan Pierce, he said. He listened for 30 seconds. He didn't say a word. He just listened, his eyes locking onto mine. I understand. Send over the order. We will file an emergency motion to vacate. He hung up and placed the phone gently on the desk. That was the clerk from the civil division, Alan said. Victor Hanley went to a judge this morning, an ex parte hearing. That means we weren't there to defend ourselves. He argued that you were moving assets offshore, which is a lie, and that there was an immediate risk of the partnership losing its capital. And? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The judge granted a temporary freeze, Alan said. It is standard procedure until a full hearing can be held next week. But as of 10 minutes ago, the operating accounts of Skyline Crest are locked. The room spun. Locked? I stood up. Alan, I have a payroll run on Friday. I have a $60,000 payment due to the electrical contractors for the Riverside renovation tomorrow. If that check bounces, they walk off the job. If they walk off, we miss the inspection deadline. If we miss the inspection, the occupancy permit is delayed. I know, Alan said. And the mortgage, I continued, the panic rising in my throat like bile. The interest payment on the portfolio is due on the 1st. That is $40,000. If I miss that, the bank puts me in default. My credit rating tanks. The refinancing deal dies. I looked at Nora. She was looking at the floor, ashamed. This isn't a lawsuit, I said, realizing the full scope of the attack. This is a siege. They are trying to starve me out. They know they can't win in trial, Alan explained, his voice hard. So they are creating a liquidity crisis. They want you to panic. They want you to look at your frozen accounts, your angry contractors, and your defaulted loans, and decide that writing them a check for $2 million is cheaper than losing your company. It was brilliant. It was the kind of tactical cruelty that required intimate knowledge of my business. Marianne knew exactly when my payments were due. She knew I ran a lean operation, reinvesting almost every dollar back into the buildings. She knew I didn't have $1 million sitting in a personal savings account to weather a storm like this. I heard them, Nora whispered. We both turned to her. I was in the kitchen, Nora said, twisting her hands. Mom was on speakerphone with Mr. Hanley. He told her, "We don't need to prove she promised you the company. We just need to make it impossible for her to operate without you." He said that once the contractors start walking off the job, you would beg to settle. I felt a heat rising in my chest that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with rage. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. I could see the river. I could see the buildings I had saved from ruin. I had built this life brick by brick. I had eaten ramen noodles for 3 years so I could afford the down payments. I had learned plumbing so I wouldn't have to hire someone to fix toilets at midnight. And now, the woman who had spent those years getting manicures and judging me from her suburban sofa was trying to burn it all down because she felt entitled to the ashes. "Beg," I repeated. "She thinks I will beg." I turned back to the room. The fear was gone. The shock of the lawsuit was gone. What was left was a clarity as sharp as the diamond in my pocket. "Alan," I said, "how long do we have before the checks actually bounce?" 48 hours, Alan said. "The freeze takes time to propagate through the banking system, but once it hits, you are paralyzed." "Good," I said. "That gives us 2 days to draft the countersuit." Alan raised an eyebrow. "Countersuit?" "We are not just filing a motion to vacate the freeze," I said, walking back to my desk. "We are filing a cross-complaint. Tortious interference with business relations, abuse of process, malicious prosecution, and I want to sue them for the return of the legal fees I'm about to spend." "That is aggressive," Alan said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "But without hard evidence of malice, it is just he said, she said." "We have evidence of malice," I said. "We have Nora's testimony about the conversation with Hanley. That proves the freeze was obtained in bad faith to force a settlement." I looked at Nora. "Will you sign an affidavit?" Nora looked terrified. If she signed, she was homeless. Marianne would kick her out before the ink was dry. "You can stay here," I said instantly. "There is a guest suite on the 2nd floor. It is empty. Pack your bags tonight. Get out of that house." Nora looked at me, tears welling up again. She nodded slowly. "But that is not all," I said to Alan. "We need to attack her credibility. We need to show the judge that Marianne Riley is a person who falsifies financial realities for profit." I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed the velvet pouch. I wasn't going to play the card yet. Not today. Today was about survival. But knowing it was there gave me the strength to look at the destruction of my cash flow and not blink. "Start drafting," I told Alan. "I will call the contractors personally. I will tell them there is a clerical error with the bank and that I am cutting personal checks from my emergency reserve to cover the gap for this week. It will drain my personal savings to zero, but it will keep the lights on." "You are going to liquidity zero?" Alan asked, concerned. "I am betting on myself," I said. "If I survive this week, I survive the war. But Alan, when we get to that hearing next week, I want you to be ready to ask her about her assets, all of them, including her jewelry." Alan nodded. He understood. We were setting the trap. "Nora," I said, "go home, act normal, pack your things when they are asleep. Come here at midnight." Nora left. Alan opened his laptop and started typing, the keys clacking like machine gun fire. I sat down in my leather chair. The sun had gone down, and the office was bathed in the cold blue light of the city. On the desk lay the lawsuit that was meant to be my obituary. Marianne had made a fatal error. She thought money was my weakness. She thought that by taking away my liquidity, she would take away my power. But she forgot where I came from. I started with negative $20,000. I started with nothing but grit and a tolerance for pain that she could never understand. I took the diamond out of the pouch and set it on top of the lawsuit, right over the word plaintiff. "You want to freeze my assets, Mom?" I whispered. "Fine, but remember, ice is slippery, and you are the one standing on the edge." The conference room at Pearson Associates had become my war room. For the last 48 hours, the air had smelled of stale coffee, expensive toner, and the ozone scent of overheating laptops. We were not just building a defense, We were building a fortress. Alan had assembled a team that looked like a surgical unit. There were 2 junior associates buried in cardboard boxes of receipts, a paralegal who was scanning documents at the speed of light, and Marcus, a forensic accountant we had hired from a top-tier firm. Marcus was a man who saw the world in binary code. Either the numbers balanced, or they did not. There was no room for family sentiment in his spreadsheets. "We have completed the trace," Marcus said, sliding a thick report across the polished mahogany table. "We went back 10 years, every single transaction, every deposit, every withdrawal." I picked up the report. It was heavy. It was the weight of my entire adult life condensed into columns and rows. "And?" I asked. "It is clean," Marcus stated, tapping the cover. "We can prove, down to the cent, that the initial $20,000 from your mother was repaid in full 8 years ago. We can also prove that the capital used to purchase the Riverside 220 building came exclusively from the retained earnings of Skyline Crest and a commercial line of credit secured by your personal assets. Marianne Riley did not contribute a dime. In fact, the only financial interaction she has had with the company in the last 5 years was receiving a gift basket you paid for out of your own pocket." "Perfect," Alan said, pacing the room. "This is our shield. Now we need to sharpen the sword." We were preparing for a campaign I had named Operation Paper Truth. Marianne's strategy relied on emotion, ambiguity, and the public's tendency to believe a crying mother over a cold CEO. She was fighting a guerrilla war of rumors. I decided to fight a conventional war of overwhelming documentation. I had called an emergency meeting with my primary investors and the senior lending officers from First National Bank. They were the people who actually held the keys to my kingdom. If they panicked, I was dead. If they stood by me, Marianne could post on Facebook until her fingers bled, and it would not matter. The meeting took place at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. I walked into the boardroom at the bank, not wearing sunglasses to hide my face, but with my hair pulled back, exposing the bandage on my cheek. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to see that I was injured but still standing. Robert Vance, the banker who had sent the worried email, sat at the head of the table. 3 other private investors sat opposite him. They looked skeptical. They had seen the blogs. They had heard the whispers about a family feud that could tie up the title to the building for years. "Thank you for seeing me," I said, placing a single massive binder on the table. "Harper," Robert said, his voice cautious. "You know we value our relationship, but these allegations, a hidden partnership claim, is serious. If your mother truly owns 40% of the company, our entire risk assessment is wrong." "She owns 0%, I said. "And I am not here to ask you to take my word for it. I am here to show you the receipts." I opened the binder. "Tab 1, I instructed. "The notarized amendment to the Articles of Organization, removing Marianne Riley as registered agent 8 years ago. Tab 2, "The cashed check for $22,000, endorsed by her, marked Final Loan Repayment. Tab 3, "A sworn affidavit from the notary public who witnessed her signature on the release of interest form." I watched them flip the pages. The sound was rhythmic, almost soothing. "And tab 4, I continued, gesturing to Marcus, who was standing by the projector. "This is a forensic audit conducted over the last 48 hours. It tracks the source of every dollar used to buy the Riverside building. You will see that 100% of the equity came from my operating profits." Robert Vance adjusted his spectacles. He ran his finger down the columns of the audit. He looked at the signature on the check. He looked at the notarized stamp. "This is thorough," one of the private investors muttered. "I was told by a colleague that there were missing emails, that there was a verbal agreement." "There are no missing emails," I said. "And in the state of New York, a verbal agreement for real estate ownership cannot supersede a written operating agreement that explicitly states I am the sole member. That is the law. But more importantly, gentlemen, this is the truth." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "My family is trying to execute a hostile takeover using emotional blackmail," I said, keeping my voice level. "They are betting that you will be too scared of the noise to look at the signal. I am asking you to look at the signal. I am the one who pays the mortgage. I am the one who manages the tenants. I am the one who built the value you are investing in. They are just ghosts trying to haunt a house they didn't build." Robert looked up from the binder. He closed it with a soft thud. "The blog post was very convincing," Robert admitted. "But this," he tapped the binder, "this is commerce. This is fact." He looked at the other investors. "I am satisfied," Robert said. "First National Bank will not enforce the default clause based on frivolous litigation. As long as the payments are made, we stand with the documented owner." "The payments will be made," I promised, knowing that I was about to drain my personal savings to zero to make that happen. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter. I had secured the perimeter. Now, it was time to counterattack. Back at the office, Alan was drafting the cross-complaint. It was a vicious piece of legal writing. We were not just denying their claims. We were suing Marianne, Blake, and Tessa for tortious interference with business relations, abuse of process, and slander of title. We are asking for damages equal to the lost revenue from the delayed tenants, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages for malicious intent, Alan explained, scrolling through the document on his screen. "It looks good," I said, "but we need to set the hook." "The diamond," Alan said. "Yes." We had debated this for hours. If we put the evidence of insurance fraud directly into the public filing now, Marianne would see it immediately. She would plead the fifth. She would claim it was a misunderstanding. She would have time to manufacture a lie. We needed her to walk into the deposition thinking she was safe. We needed her to lie under oath first. "I will send a communication to Victor Hanley," Alan said. "I will tell him that we are preparing to add a cause of action regarding fraudulent financial representations made by his client. I won't specify the ring. I will just say we have evidence that contradicts her sworn financial statements." "He will think we are bluffing," I said. "Exactly," Alan smiled. "He thinks he is dealing with a desperate daughter. He doesn't know we have the serial number." Alan sent the email at 2 p.m. "Mr. Hanley, please find attached our cross-complaint. Furthermore, we advise you to review your client's financial disclosures carefully. We have come into possession of physical evidence that suggests Mrs. Riley has a history of making material misrepresentations regarding her assets and insurance claims. We strongly suggest you advise your client to withdraw her suit before we are forced to enter this evidence into the criminal record." It was vague. It was threatening. It was perfect. We waited. The response came at 5 o'clock. It was not a withdrawal. It was a settlement offer. I sat in my chair, holding the letter Victor Hanley had faxed over. It was almost laughable in its arrogance. "Ms. Riley, your vague threats of evidence are clearly a stalling tactic and a transparent attempt at intimidation. My client is an upstanding member of the community and a victim of elder abuse. However, Mrs. Riley is a forgiving mother. She is willing to drop the lawsuit and the request for asset freezing if the following conditions are met. 1. Sage. Riley admits to the implied partnership. 2. Sage Riley pays a one-time buyout fee of $2 million to the Riley Family Trust. 3. Sage Riley issues a public apology for the distress caused to her family. This offer expires in 24 hours. If refused, we will proceed with the preliminary injunction hearing and seek full damages. I read the letter twice. $2 million. They wanted me to pay them $2 million to go away. It was extortion. It was a shakedown wrapped in a legal letterhead. They took the bait, Alan said, standing by the window. They think the evidence line was just noise. They are doubling down. I looked at the number again. $2 million. Any other day, this letter would have made me sick with anxiety. But today, reading it, I felt a strange sense of calm. It was the calm of a demolition expert who has just finished wiring the building and is holding the detonator. They had just put in writing that they were willing to settle for money. They didn't want the company. They didn't want to build a legacy. They wanted a payday. And by ignoring the warning about the fraud, they had signaled their arrogance. Marianne truly believed she was untouchable. She believed that because she had gotten away with the fake theft in Italy, she could get away with stealing my company in America. "She thinks I am bluffing," I said to Alan. "She thinks I am still the little girl who's afraid of making Mommy angry." I folded the settlement offer and placed it in the shredder. The machine roared to life, eating the paper in seconds. "Draft the rejection." "Alan," I said, my voice cold. "Tell Mr. Hanley that we decline his generous offer. Tell him we look forward to seeing him and his client in court for the injunction hearing on Monday." "Are you sure?" Alan asked. "Once we go to that hearing, the judge will ask for evidence. You have to be ready to drop the bomb." I reached into my pocket and touched the velvet pouch. "I am ready," I said. "Monday morning, we let her testify. We let her tell the judge how honest she is. We let her tell the story about the poor, victimized mother." I looked at the empty spot on the desk where the settlement offer had been. "And then," I said, "I am going to show the world exactly what kind of ring she is trying to kiss." The trap was set. They had walked right into the center of the X, blinded by their own greed. Now, all I had to do was wait for the judge to bang the gavel and ask the first question. The courtroom was colder than the morgue, and it smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. Courtroom 4B of the Civil Division was where businesses went to die, usually buried under mountains of paperwork and billable hours. I sat at the defendant's table, my back straight, my hands clasped on the polished wood. To my right sat Alan, arranging his files with the precision of a bomb disposal technician. Behind me, in the gallery, sat Nora. Her presence was a silent scream of defiance. She was pale, terrified, but she was there. Next to her sat Robert Vance from the bank and two of my key contractors. They had come to see if their investment was safe, or if they needed to start calling their own lawyers. Opposite us sat the Riley family. Marianne had dressed for the role of a lifetime. Gone was the sharp, silk-wearing socialite who drank champagne while seizing my penthouse. In her place was a fragile, elderly woman in a soft, powder-blue cardigan. She walked with a slight hesitation, clutching a tissue in one hand. But on her other hand, she still wore the ring. I watched her closely as she took her seat. She was careful. She kept her left hand resting on her lap, curled slightly, or tucked under her right arm. She had rotated the band so that the empty setting, the jagged metal claw where the diamond used to be, was turned inward, hidden against her palm. She was literally hiding her flaws in the palm of her hand. "All rise," the bailiff droned. Judge Sylvia Thorne entered. She was a woman in her 60s with a reputation for hating time-wasters. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the two tables. "We are here on an emergency motion to vacate a temporary restraining order regarding the assets of Skyline Crest Properties," Judge Thorne said. "Mr. Hanley, this is your motion. Make it quick. Why should I keep this company frozen?" Victor Hanley stood up. He was slick, polished, and oozed false sincerity. "Your Honor," Victor began, his voice dropping to a sympathetic baritone, "this is not a standard corporate dispute. This is a tragedy. My client, Mrs. Marianne Riley, is not just an investor. She is the matriarch. She is the co-founder. 10 years ago, she provided the seed capital, $20,000, that birthed this empire. She signed the loans when the banks turned her daughter away." He gestured to Marianne, who dabbed at dry eyes. "For a decade, there was an implied partnership," Victor continued. "A trust. Mrs. Riley believed she was building a legacy for her children, but last week, when she attempted to exercise her rights as a partner, she was physically removed from the premises by security guards hired by her own daughter. She has been erased from the books. We are asking the court to maintain the freeze to prevent the defendant from liquidating the assets that rightfully belong to the family trust." It was a good performance. If I didn't know the truth, I might have felt sorry for her. Judge Thorne looked at me. "Mr. Pierce, your response?" Alan stood up. He didn't use flowery language. He didn't use emotion. He used gravity. Your Honor, Alan said, Mr. Hanley is telling a fairy tale. We are here to talk about contracts. Alan walked to the projector. Exhibit A, Alan said. The amendment to the Articles of Organization, filed 8 years ago. It removes Marianne Riley as registered agent. It is notarized. Exhibit B, he continued, the slide changing. A cashier's check for $22,000, endorsed by the plaintiff. Memo line, final loan repayment. This was not seed capital for equity. It was a loan, and it was paid with interest. Exhibit C, Alan finished. A forensic accounting audit completed yesterday. It shows that every dollar used to purchase the Riverside property, the asset in dispute, came from the retained earnings of the defendant, years after the plaintiff was removed from the records. The judge looked at the screen. The dates were undeniable. Mr. Hanley? Judge Thorne asked, her eyebrows raising. These documents seem dispositive. Your client signed a release. Victor didn't blink. He was ready for this. Your Honor, Victor argued, documents only tell half the story in family law. We have emails, hundreds of them. He waved a stack of papers. Here is an email from the defendant, dated 5 years ago. Mom, I couldn't do this without you. You are the reason Skyline exists. Here is another. Let's have dinner to discuss the future of the company. These communications prove a meeting of the minds. They prove that despite the paperwork, there was an ongoing verbal agreement that the business was a family asset. The judge frowned. She looked at the emails. This was the gray area. This was the mud they wanted to drag me into. Ms. Riley, Judge Thorne said, looking directly at me. Did you send these emails? I stood up. I did, Your Honor. I was being a grateful daughter. I was thanking my mother for her emotional support. I was not granting her 40% of my corporation. It is a question of intent, Victor interrupted, and the intent is clear. Mrs. Riley acted in reliance on these promises. The air in the room was thick. The judge was wavering. She was looking at the fragile woman in the blue cardigan and the stack of loving emails. It was enough to keep the freeze in place for a trial. That was all they needed. A trial would take months. My business would die in weeks. Alan looked at me. I gave him a microscopic nod. It was time. Your Honor, Alan said, his voice changing pitch. It became sharper, like a blade being drawn. The plaintiff's entire case rests on her credibility. She claims there was a verbal contract. She claims she is a victim of deception. Therefore, her honesty regarding financial matters is the central issue of this hearing. Where are you going with this, Counselor? Judge Thorne asked. I would like to ask Mrs. Riley a few questions about her assets, specifically, the assets she claims she contributed to the family trust. The judge nodded. Proceed. Marianne took the stand. She looked nervous, glancing at Victor, but he nodded encouragingly. He thought this was just procedural. Mrs. Riley, Alan said, walking up to the witness box. You claim you have invested everything into this family's future. You listed your assets in your financial disclosure for this lawsuit. Is that correct? Yes, Marianne said, her voice trembling slightly. I have nothing to hide. You listed a jewelry collection, Alan said, looking at a paper. Specifically, a custom platinum diamond set, ring, earrings, pendant, valued at $85,000. Is that correct? Marianne stiffened. Her hand, the one with the ring, slid off the railing and into her lap. Yes, she said. My husband bought it for me. And is that the ring you are wearing today? Alan asked. Victor stood up. Objection. Relevance? We are litigating a building, not her wardrobe. It goes to credibility, Your Honor, Alan said. Please. Overruled, the judge said. Answer the question. Yes, Marianne said, lifting her chin. This is the ring. Alan took a step closer. It is a beautiful piece. But Mrs. Riley, did you not file an insurance claim 11 months ago, stating that this specific set was stolen in Naples, Italy? The room went silent. Victor froze. Marianne's face drained of color, leaving the rouge on her cheeks standing out like clown paint. She stammered. Yes, I was robbed. It was terrible. So you were robbed, Alan repeated. You filed a police report, and you received a payout of $85,000 from the insurer. Is that correct? Yes, she whispered. So how? Alan asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Are you wearing the ring today? Marianne's eyes darted around the room. She was trapped. She had to lie. To tell the truth meant admitting to insurance fraud. To lie meant perjury. She chose the lie she thought she could survive. I used the money to replace it, she said quickly. I was so heartbroken. I found a jeweler. He recreated it. He replaced the stones. It is a replica. A replica, Alan repeated. So the diamonds in that ring are new? Bought within the last year? Yes, Marianne said, gaining confidence. Exactly. Alan turned to the judge. Your Honor, I ask that the witness remove her ring and allow it to be entered into evidence for immediate inspection. Objection, Victor shouted. This is harassment. If it is a replica, Alan said calmly, then the serial numbers on the diamonds will not match the serial numbers of the stolen set. It is a simple verification. Judge Thorne looked at Marianne. She saw the sweat on her upper lip. Hand over the ring, Mrs. Riley, the judge ordered. Marianne's hands shook so badly she could barely get it off. She slid it across the surface of the witness stand. The bailiff took it and handed it to Alan. Alan held it up. Your Honor, I note for the record that one of the side stones is missing. The setting is damaged. He turned to the defense table. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the small, clear evidence bag. Inside, the single diamond sat like a captured star. Your Honor, Alan said, 3 nights ago, the plaintiff assaulted my client in her home. During that assault, this diamond fell from the plaintiff's ring. My client recovered it. I stood up and walked the bag to the bailiff. We have had this stone examined by a certified gemologist, Alan said, handing the judge the report Lena had printed. As you will see in the report, this diamond has a laser inscription on the girdle, serial number LG49227 Alpha. Alan paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. That serial number, Alan said, slamming the final document onto the judge's bench, corresponds exactly to the registry of the ring Mrs. Riley claimed was stolen in Italy. It is not a replica. Your Honor, it is the original stone. She filed a false police report, collected $85,000 in fraud proceeds, and kept the jewelry. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. Victor Hanley looked at his client with a mixture of horror and fury. He realized he had been led into a trap. He had marched his client onto the stand to commit a felony. Judge Thorne picked up the gemologist's report. Then she picked up the insurance claim document Alan had provided. She looked at the ring. She took off her glasses. She looked at Marianne Riley. The frail mother act had evaporated. Marianne sat in the witness box, small, exposed, and utterly ruined. Mrs. Riley, Judge Thorne said. Her voice was not loud, but it resonated off the mahogany walls like a gavel strike. You just testified under oath that this ring was a replica. You testified that the original was stolen. Marianne opened her mouth, but no sound came out. If you are willing to lie to the Italian police, the judge continued, leaning forward, and if you are willing to lie to an insurance company for $85,000, and if you are willing to lie to me in this courtroom about the very assets you claim to own. The judge paused. Why on earth should I believe a single word you say about a verbal contract for a multi-million-dollar building? Marianne began to cry. Real tears this time, tears of terror. I just wanted what was fair, she sobbed. I am her mother. You are a perjurer, Judge Thorne said coldly, and quite possibly a felon. The judge turned to Victor. Mr. Hanley, I am dissolving the temporary restraining order effective immediately. The assets of Skyline Crest are released. Furthermore, I am dismissing your motion for a preliminary injunction." She looked back at me. "Ms. Riley, your cross-complaint regarding legal fees and damages?" "We are proceeding, Your Honor," Allen said. "Good," the judge said. "And bailiff, please secure that ring and that diamond. I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing and the physical evidence to the district attorney's office. They might have some questions for Mrs. Riley regarding insurance fraud." The gavel came down. Bang. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Marianne collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands. Blake and Tessa stared at her, horrified. Not for her, but for themselves. They knew the money tap had just been turned off forever. I stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just felt a massive weight lift off my chest. I looked at the judge, then I looked at my mother. She looked back at me, her eyes filled with hate and fear. She had wanted to teach me a lesson about family. She taught me that family is just a word, but the truth? The truth is a diamond. It is hard, it is cold, and it cuts through everything. The silence that followed the judge's question to my mother was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It hung over the courtroom for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the sharp, decisive sound of Judge Thorne shifting the papers on her bench. "Based on the evidence presented," Judge Thorne began, her voice stripping away the last shreds of Victor Hanley's theatrics, "the court finds that the plaintiff's claims of an implied partnership are not only unsubstantiated by the record, but are actively contradicted by the very documents she signed." I watched Marianne. She was not looking at me. She was staring at her hands that were now bare, stripped of the ring that had been her shield and her weapon. "The timeline is irrefutable," the judge continued. "The defendant, Sage Riley, repaid the initial loan 8 years ago. The purchase of the Riverside 220 property was funded entirely by the defendant's separate entities. There is no commingling of funds. There is no ambiguity in the operating agreement." Victor tried to stand, perhaps to salvage some dignity, but the judge raised a hand, stopping him cold. "Sit down, Mr. Hanley. I am not finished." Judge Thorne looked directly at me, then at the trembling woman in the witness box. "The motion to freeze the assets of Skyline Crest Properties is denied. The temporary restraining order is vacated immediately. You are free to operate your business. Miss Riley." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a week, but the judge turned her gaze back to the plaintiff's table, and her expression hardened. "As for the underlying lawsuit claiming breach of fiduciary duty and seeking a declaratory judgment of partnership, I am dismissing it, and I am dismissing it with prejudice." With prejudice? Those 2 words were the final lock on the door. It meant they could never file this lawsuit again. They could never rephrase it, repackage it, or drag me back into court over this specific claim. It was dead. "Furthermore," Judge Thorne said, picking up the gemologist's report, "this court finds that the plaintiffs brought this action in bad faith, using a frivolous legal theory to exert economic pressure on the defendant. Therefore, I am ordering the plaintiffs, Marianne, Blake, and Tessa Riley, to pay the defendant's legal fees in full." Blake's jaw dropped. "We have to pay her lawyer?" he blurted out, forgetting where he was. "Yes, Mr. Riley," the judge snapped. "You do. And considering the evidence of insurance fraud that has come to light regarding your mother's financial disclosures, I strongly suggest you save whatever money you have left. I am referring the transcript of this hearing and the physical evidence of the ring to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation." The gavel came down. It sounded like a gunshot ending a long, miserable war. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted into movement. The bailiff moved toward Marianne to formally secure the ring as evidence. Victor Hanley was already packing his briefcase, looking like he wanted to sprint to the nearest exit and pretend he had never met the Riley family. I stood up. My legs felt steady. The crushing weight of the asset freeze, the fear of the bank defaulting, the humiliation of the blog posts, it all evaporated, leaving behind a cold, clear reality. I turned to Alan. He didn't high-five me. He didn't cheer. He just nodded. a professional acknowledging that the job was done. "Come on," Alan said. "Let's get the order signed so we can fax it to the bank before close of business." We walked toward the heavy oak doors. Nora was right beside me, her head held high for the first time in her life. But we didn't make it out of the courtroom before they intercepted us. In the aisle, right before the gallery exit, Marianne stepped into my path. She looked small. The cardigan she wore, which was meant to elicit sympathy, now just made her look defeated. Her eyes were red, rimmed with the smudged makeup of her performance. "Harper," she said. Her voice was thin, raspy. I stopped. I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her. "I just wanted to be recognized," she whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. "I just wanted you to acknowledge that I helped you start. That is all I wanted. Why did you have to take it this far?" It was breathtaking. Even now, facing a criminal investigation, she was trying to rewrite the narrative. She was trying to make me the aggressor. "You didn't want recognition." "Mom," I said. My voice was calm, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather and not the destruction of our family. "You wanted control. And when you couldn't have control, you wanted money." "I am your mother," she pleaded, reaching out a hand as if to touch my arm. I stepped sideways, avoiding her touch. "The papers recognize everything exactly as it is," I said. "The loan, the repayment, the ownership, it is all there in black and white. The rest of this, the fraud, the lies, the humiliation you are feeling right now, that is not my fault. That is the bill coming due for everything you bought with fake currency." "You ruined us!" Blake shouted, stepping up behind Marianne. His face was purple with rage. He wasn't looking at me, though. He was glaring at his mother. "You told us it was a sure thing. You told us the ring was a replica. How could you be so stupid to wear the stolen one to court?" "Blake, please," Marianne sobbed, shrinking away from him. "Shut up," Blake yelled. "Do you know what this does to me? I am liable for her legal fees now. I don't have $50,000. Harper, you can't do this to me." "I didn't do it, Blake," I said coldly. "You signed the lawsuit. You put your name next to hers. You wanted the reward without the risk. Now you have the debt." Tessa was standing by the wall, scrolling frantically on her phone, probably deleting her social media posts supporting her mother. She looked up, eyes wide with a feigned innocence. "I didn't know," Tessa said, her voice trembling. "Harper, you know I just went along with what Mom said. I didn't know about the insurance money. You can't hold me responsible for that." I looked at them, the three of them, turning on each other before the ink on the judgment was even dry. They were like rats in a bucket, biting whoever was closest to survive. "I don't care," I said. It was the most liberating sentence I had ever spoken. I turned to Nora. "Are you coming?" Nora looked at her mother, then at her siblings. She took a deep breath. "I am coming with Harper," Nora said clearly, "and I don't want any of you to call me." "You are ungrateful!" Marianne shrieked, her voice cracking. "After everything I did." "You didn't do anything for us." "Mom," Nora said, her voice shaking but firm. "You just used us as leverage against each other. I am done being leverage." Nora turned her back on them. It was a simple motion, but it shattered the last hold Marianne had on the room. We walked out into the hallway. The heavy doors swung shut behind us, muffling the sounds of Blake's swearing and Marianne's sobbing. Alan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to me. "This is the certified copy of the judgment," Alan said, "and the summary of the dismissal. Keep this, copy it, put it in your safe. This is your shield. Harper, every word on these pages is a boundary that the law will enforce. Between your work and their greed, there is now a wall they cannot climb." I took the envelope. It felt solid. It felt real. I instinctively reached for my pocket, but the diamond was gone. It was in an evidence locker now, tagged and bagged, waiting to be used in a criminal trial against my mother. I didn't miss it. That stone had started this week as a symbol of her dominance. a weapon that cut my face. Then it became a secret. Then it became a trap. Now, it was just a rock, a cold, hard reminder that people show you who they are, not by what they say, but by what they are willing to destroy to get what they want. We walked toward the exit of the courthouse. As we pushed through the revolving doors, the flash of cameras blinded me for a second. The local press had caught wind of the Riley family feud. They were hungry for a tragedy. They wanted the story of the daughter who threw her mother to the wolves. "Ms. Riley," a reporter shouted, thrusting a microphone in my face. "Is it true you evicted your own mother? How do you respond to claims that this is a family tragedy?" I stopped. I adjusted my jacket. I touched the bandage on my cheek one last time. "This is not a story about a mother and a daughter," I said, looking directly into the camera lens. My voice was steady, projecting the authority of a CEO who had just survived a hostile takeover. "This is a story about ownership. It is a story about reading the fine print. And it is a story about the high price people pay when they think being family gives them the right to ignore the law." "But the lawsuit," the reporter pressed. "The lawsuit was dismissed," I said. "Skyline Crest Properties belongs to me. It always has. And that is the only comment I will ever make." I turned and walked to my car, leaving the questions hanging in the damp afternoon air. An hour later, I stood in the lobby of the Riverside 220 Lofts. It was quiet. The banner that read Riley Family Estate Planning was gone, ripped down by the cleaning crew I had hired immediately after the injunction was lifted. The tape marks had been scrubbed away. The floor where the diamond had fallen was polished and spotless. I walked to the center of the room. The space was vast, filled with the golden light of the late afternoon sun reflecting off the river. I was alone. For years, I had feared this loneliness. I had let them invade my boundaries because I thought the noise of their chaos was better than the silence of solitude. I had paid their debts, laughed at their insults, and tolerated their greed because I thought that was the tax I had to pay for connection. I was wrong. This wasn't loneliness, this was peace. I walked over to the brass plaque mounted on the wall near the elevators. It shone under the recessed lighting. Skyline. Crest Properties. Sage Riley. Principal. I reached out and traced the letters of my name. The metal was cool and solid under my fingertips. There was no champagne. There were no fake toasts. There were no backhanded compliments about how I owed it all to someone else. There was just the building. There were the contracts in my safe. And there was the future. A future that was entirely, legally, and beautifully mine. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of the lobby, fresh lilies and expensive stone. I was safe. The war was over. And for the first time in my life, the keys in my pocket opened doors that no one else could ever lock again. Thank you so much for listening to Harper's story. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and resilience, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Harper handled her family. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and please hit the like button so more people can hear this story. Your support means the world to us.